Hello, today I'm going to show you how I made this puff. As always, if you like this video and would like to see more, please don't forget to like and subscribe if you haven't already. So this was originally a puff that my mum purchased from a charity shop, and I think she'd been holding on to it for a bit. And one time I visited her, she asked whether I'd like to cover it. So it originally had this sort of pinkish upholstery fabric over it. As it turned out, it was a puff within another cover. So originally it was a leather puff, but they'd stuck wadding all over the outside. Anyway, I'll let you watch the highlights of making it. It was a very long make, so I will have edited it down quite substantially, and then I'll give some feedback on how I felt it went at the end. To begin with, I unpicked the cover that was on the puff. As you can see in the footage, it was quite a simple task actually. I was quite surprised at how easy it was to unpick it, and it probably took me about half an hour in total. I did accidentally rip the top piece. I don't know if it's just because the fabric was old or maybe I was a bit harsh with it. I did retrieve the cord out of it as well. I originally thought I was going to use it in the project, but in the end I didn't end up using it. So next I measured the pieces from the original puff cover to give me an idea on a template. So I measured to get a rough idea, and then I transferred this onto paper to get some paper pattern pieces. As you can see here, I've used a simple ceramic bowl to make the curved edges. Once I got the main template, I then added a seam allowance around the edge. For the sides, I made one long narrow strip, so for the pattern piece I did half the length just to save on paper. For the cover, I decided to use some simple calico, so I had quite a bit at home anyway. And to be honest, this puff cover didn't take an awful lot of calico anyway, but I thought it would be a nice plain base material for it. So I sewed the two short ends together for the side panel piece, and then I cut in little notches into one of the bases. So as you can see here, I'm trying to pin it together, but I realized that the measurements didn't work out properly together, or they weren't, the original puff measurements weren't uniform enough, so it wouldn't fit on properly. So what I ended up doing was fitting it around the puff, taking in the side panel a little bit more because I hadn't done it tight enough, and then I pinned the base piece all the way around. Pinning it by eye just gave it a much tighter fit. Once I was happy with how I'd pinned it, I then tacked that into place. Once tacked in place, I went to the sewing machine and sewed it into place. Once sewn into place, I then put the cover back on to see how it fitted, and I was pretty happy with that. And then I tucked in the top raw edge of the exposed side just to get an idea of how it would sit level. Once I was happy with that, I put a couple of pins in to keep it into place and then took the cover off. I pressed it into place and then I trimmed the raw edge just so it was a bit more even. Although it wouldn't be on show, I thought it might show slightly through the fabric. Once trimmed, I then put the top piece into place and started pinning it round, but this time I couldn't do it with it inside out. I needed to do it the right way up. I noticed on that pinkish puffy cover that I unpicked from it, the one panel piece had been stitched in by hand, and I realised that that was the only way that I'd be able to do it. So that's what I did next. I then hand stitched all the way around, did a simple slip stitch and gradually secured it in place the whole way around. Once the whole of the base cover was on, I then made a cover over the top of this. So you can see here I'm pinning my original pattern template into place, and I folded it under to try and mold it to the new shape of the puff. Once I was happy with that, I took it off. Then I went about to cut two pieces out, so I wanted a top and a base pattern piece from this. However, I needed to add a seam allowance onto this. I say seam allowance, just the hem all the way around, so I added 2 centimeters to the outside of it with a chalk pen. I then pressed 1 centimeter in on the edges and then a further 1 centimeter and stitched that in place to neaten the edges. Next, I cut out the cat piece from the other fabric I had. So I tried to have it fairly centered in the panel that I cut out. I then measured the piece that I'd cut out and went about to find a nice central place on the top of the puff. I used a fabric pen to mark out the rectangle ready for adding it as reverse applique. So to start with, I stitched along the fabric pen line just to reinforce the rectangle. Next, I marked, I think it was about 1 centimeter in from that stitching line in order to cut out a bit of the calico and then clipped the corners. I then pinned the cat bit of fabric into place, then moved over to the sewing machine and stitched it in place close to the edge of the rectangular opening. With the top and bottom pieces ready for the outer layer of the puff, I then marked holes to add blanket stitch to the top and bottom pieces. So I decided to leave 1 centimetre gap between each hole, and I'm using an awl to poke a hole into it. So I got a bit carried away here, as you might be able to see, so I got a darning needle out and just tested what it would look like before I pierced all the other holes. So looks like I did a fair few stitches just to see what it looked like, and then when I was happy with it, I carried on and poked the rest of the holes around the edges. So I needed to poke holes into both the top and bottom pieces, because this is how I was going to add my side panels in by crocheting. Once I'd poked all the holes through the fabric, I then carried on with my blanket stitch, adding blanket stitch to the edge of both the top and bottom pieces. Once blanket stitch was around the top and bottom pieces, I could add the side panel. So I crocheted the sides for this puff cover. Anyone who's seen the throw that's on my sofa will know that these are the same square design and also some of the same yarns that I've used for this, just so it would tie in nicely with our lounge. So what I'm doing here is I'm double crocheting the crocheted square panel to the base piece of the cover. So I'm using the blanket stitch edge in order to double crochet up to the edge of those squares. And essentially this is what I did. I attached the base piece the whole way around with double crochet, and then I flipped it over and added the top piece in exactly the same way. Okay, so that's a summary of how I made this puff. Just to recap, I obviously made a base cover, and that's all in calico, which I had at home. So originally I did use templates, but because it was such a strange shape, obviously because it is an old puff and it's probably got a bit distorted over time, I ended up having to just wing it and pin it. Once I'd made the base layer, I then made a top piece, a base piece, and I crocheted the side panels. These crocheted squares are the ones that I have on the throw in my lounge on the sofa. So originally I crocheted 24 squares because I thought that would be enough, and then I realised once I'd done 24 squares that it needed a little bit more, so I crocheted another 4. The fabric on the top is from the puff that I already had, so that's a much larger one which I recovered with my mum years ago, and this was just a remnant, so I didn't have an awful lot of the fabric left. It used to be, I think it was an IKEA curtain. Anyway, it was quite a small panel, and with obviously centred the only giant cat on this panel for the other puff top. So on this one I only had one cat left, and it's one of the smaller cats, so it's quite nice because so it nods towards the other puff, but equally it's got a smaller cat to go in proportion with the smaller puff size. Because I didn't have enough fabric, I wanted to applique it onto the top. Originally I was just going to go around the outline, and then I realised a much better way to do it was to essentially reverse applique and create this window, which I'm really happy with. I had to use an awl to go and punch holes to do the blanket stitch, just because I'd obviously done a double hem on here and it was quite hard to puncture a blunt needle into the calico. So my reflections after making it, I'm really happy with it. It's come out just as I imagined actually, which is great. I am a little bit concerned that this calico might not be substantial enough. I'm not sure how long it will last, but saying that, you know, as long as I look after it, hopefully it will last quite a long time. One issue is that you can't take the cover off, or you need to re-crochet it back on, which would take a long time, and I'm sure I won't be that motivated. So what I have done, and this was my mum's suggestion as well, is I've put some rain and stain protector on, so it protects materials. So I think I bought this at the supermarket at some point. I actually put it on the shoulder bag I made, the Debbie Shaw office bag, because that's kind of made out of a needle cord, and I was worried about it getting all mucky. So I did spray that with this as well. So I've just put it all over, and hopefully that will give it a bit of resistance to stains and getting mucky. Yeah, overall I'm really happy. I think it's a lovely size puff, which is the reason why I wanted to recover it in the first place. Obviously, if you don't have one to cover yourself or redesign, what you can do is do similar measurements. So like I did at the start when I made a pattern, I mean, I could use those pieces to make almost a replica of this. It would just be a lot more uniform in shape, if that makes sense. I think this is quite a nice size actually for if you're into meditation as well, because it's not too high off the ground, but just enough to elevate your hips above your feet. And sometimes I quite like to sit closer to the ground as well, because obviously I do have a chronic back health issue, and I find it really beneficial to sit more in a meditative pose, because it can help improve my posture, or at least I hope it does anyway. Right, that's it for this time. I hope you enjoyed that. I'm certainly happy that I've got a new bit of decor in my house. That's it for this time. Thanks for watching.